From the precipice of humanity, people have sought methods to pass the time via entertainment. Music, theater, and games tend to top the list of indulgences across all cultures and societies. The question of what is the oldest becomes impossible to answer as time passes on, artifacts are lost, and historical documents deteriorate. So the question becomes, what is the earliest known work? For plays, the oldest known example is approximately 2,400 years old. For notated music, it's the Hyrien song, which is around 3,400 years old. What might be surprising is that the earliest known example of a game predates these two by a sizable margin. It's the game Senet, which is approximately 5,500 years old. While answering the question of what the first mechanical entertainment game or video game is an issue that may always be up for debate, the line of succession from the first home console to modern times is clear. However, one thing's not. What defines a console generation? Why do we categorize hardware into these numbered systems? And where did the term console come from? This is Retro Impressions, the console generation. For the home consumer, life starts with the Magnavox Odyssey. Created by Ralph Baer in the 60s and first released in 1972, a full 5 years after the final design was submitted for manufacturing. It would be a full 3 years before any real competition came to market, and by this time, Magnavox was moving on to new hardware. Even though these new home TV game systems mimicked the Odyssey, they were dramatically different in just about every way. The Odyssey utilized diode transistor logic, which was considered by Ralph Baer himself to be close to an antique by the time the system launched. The system relied on one of 12 daughter boards plugged directly into the motherboard to change the logic of the circuitry and produce a different control experience for the user. The system made use of TV overlays, and with some clever hacking of the circuitry via additional daughter card configurations, new control and gameplay experiences were made possible. However, while this technology constituted a player-controlled electronic TV game, it didn't allow for things such as scorekeeping or computer-controlled opponents. Thankfully, transistor logic was here, which allowed for pre-programmed routines. Though new companies were popping up with intentions of mimicking the Odyssey, they had no desire to do so by using the outdated and limited application of the diode transistor logic Ralph Baer's system was built on. On the commercial side, Atari took the table tennis idea from the Odyssey and turned it into a smash arcade hit called Pong, and that would heavily influence the consumer market moving forward. While the Odyssey's first competition were all copycats in the player experience, the method used to get there was vastly different, leading to a generation of hardware that contained a set number of games with no way to alter the logic or on-screen experience, something the original Odyssey was more than capable of. These were two experiences that seemed to run counter to each other in both the era they were developed, when they were marketed, and the technology used to get there. So why were they lumped together? What truly defines a console generation, and should the Odyssey be included as it currently is with the other systems, which have been dubbed Generation 1, also known as the Pong clones? To answer that, we need to look at where the concept of a console generation originates from. It's not complicated, it's marketing. Even with the arrival of 16-bit consoles, companies and games and media were talking about the move to the next generation of gaming hardware. One magazine, which started publication in 1995, was even named Next Generation, further cementing the term in people's minds. However, even if the public at large referred to new computer and game console hardware in this manner, that's about where it ended. Up through the early 2000s, every major site covering retro video games categorized these systems alphabetically, and in some cases by era released. This always was organized by a set date range defined by the most popular systems of those eras. The first era was anything prior to cart-based home systems. Next was the age of Atari, sometimes referred to as the pre-crash era. Any system that competed with the 2600 is included here, with the generation extending into the mid-80s. The post-crash era, or 8-bit era, was next and strictly focuses on a timeline based on the NES lifespan. If it competed against Nintendo's 8-bit machine, it was placed here. This trend continued on for the 16-bit wars with the Genesis and Super Nintendo, then again with 32-bit and 64-bit systems being defined again by Sega, Nintendo, and this time Sony. For a short time, there was even a 128-bit era. Users posting articles to Wikipedia were the driving force behind the attempts to organize consoles into segments that made sense, and while pre-NES, 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit/64-bit made sense, 128 or greater didn't. So, in the summer of 2005, this era, along with the ones which followed, were renamed 6th and 7th generation for lack of a better term, while the ones before it still remained defined by their bits and the systems driving the consumer market at that time. It's not to say the term generation had never been applied before this point, but the summer of 2005 on Wikipedia was the moment that's defined the way people have categorized consoles ever since. In 2009, the classification was further cemented by GameFAQs when they moved from an alphabetized system to the console generation listing as first defined on Wikipedia. So what truly defines a console generation? I'm not sure a more contentious topic exists, as the debate among video game historians, fans, and internet personalities rages on in the background. However, the foundations were clearly laid for the current system as the industry started to evolve in the late 80s. This is a reiteration, but it's important to say once again that the generation system was defined by the current drivers of the industry in tandem to the market competition that was directly connected to those consoles. While many people feel should be directly related to the hardware itself, the current system simply isn't set up to deal with hardware when defining a generation. Nothing better reflects the situation, as does the Vectrex in 5200 in Generation 2 or the 24-bit Neo Geo in Generation 4. And maybe it's time we consider a new system to better reflect actual hardware rather than the system we have, which is focused on what pushed the consumer market forward. The current home console generation system currently has its place, and it does well with what it sets out to accomplish. The real issue with this system is that it doesn't always well define early generations that came before the classification was put into place, even by its original design. One TV game system in particular gets improperly grouped with hardware it should remain separated from, this being the Odyssey. No onboard chips meant the player was responsible for enforcing the rules, keeping the score, and explaining what constituted gameplay to the second player. This was also strictly a two-player experience, in all cases involving the base unit, though a single-player light gun game was also available. The Odyssey was the first and only home TV game system to not contain a CPU, BIOS, or a game program stored on a ROM chip, at least in the sense of being a fresh idea and not an outright clone. By the time Atari rolled out Pong in 1975 as a Sears product, Magnavox had put the original Odyssey to bed without ever seeing any real competition in the marketplace. By the very standards that define a console generation, the Magnavox Odyssey is in a category of its own. By the time Pong released, Magnavox had moved on to more complex hardware, focusing on all-in-one game systems, setting off a gluttony of plug-and-play clones. While these units were all the rage, one company aimed to shake things up in the market with something more in line conceptually with the original Odyssey, but far more sophisticated on a technical level. The company was Fairchild, and their video game system was called the VES, short for Video Entertainment System, or Channel F. More on that in a moment. So what about the term console? What qualifies as a game console, and where did the term originate? The marketing of the original Odyssey tells us a lot about Magnavox's view on the subject. The system itself was called the Master Control Unit, and the switchable game cards were referred to as plug-and-play modules. The system as a whole was marketed as an electronic game simulator, and in many regards, that makes sense, as the hardware is far removed from anything that succeeded it. When an industry switch was made to all-in-one plug-and-play units, the terminology of the Odyssey no longer fit. These were referred to as home TV games, TV video systems, TV video games, or sometimes the game type followed by the word game, such as hockey game. However, this described the total experience and not the game system's main body itself. Atari referred to theirs as the control unit, Coleco called theirs the Telestar unit, and other makers all seem to have their own terminology which never stuck. So when Fairchild launched their revolutionary VES in 1976, companies took note. The Channel F was the first home video game system to use a microprocessor, the first to use swappable cartridges with ROM chips holding self-contained programs, and was the first to refer to the main system body of its system as a game console. The impact was immediate, as hardware released after this point almost always refers to their main system body as a game console. And Atari took cues from the VES terminology, choosing VCS for the 2600 when it launched a year later. While Fairchild was the first to market and certainly changed the way corporations refer to hardware on many levels, it's important to note that Atari and RCA were both developing similar ideas to the Channel F before that system launched. The most important, in my opinion, is the Studio 2, which launched just a couple months after Fairchild's gaming system. By looking over material prepped in '76 for the Studio 2 launch, we see that they also refer to the main body of their game system as a console, though the specific term game console was never used. So it seems that this is a turning point, where the technology once again has changed and the terminology is adjusted to more accurately distinguish what's new to the market from what's old. I don't have an answer for what a new classification of consoles or console generations should entail, but the current system does a fair job of executing its intention. It was never meant to fulfill the purpose people often believe it should, and that's okay, because there's always room for something new, and eventually, we may see a different system in place. That's it for now, and as always, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.